morning, good afternoon, and good evening, everybody. Welcome to the session Transformation of Our Food System, the Need for a Paradigm Shift. I hope that I'm now online and that you can hear me. My name is Frank Eihorn. I'm the CEO of BioVision Foundation in Switzerland, which is an organization which is active in sub-Saharan Africa on an advocacy level at global level, and is also raising awareness in Switzerland on agroecological approaches and on food system transformation. 12 years ago already, in the Global Agriculture Report, a team of some 400 experts and scientists concluded that business as usual is... Sorry, I have an echo, just a second. I try it out. Sorry, that put me off. 12 years ago, a group of 400 experts, they concluded that business as usual is not an option anymore. That was the International Assessment of Agricultural Knowledge Systems, Science and Technology for Development, also known as the IAASTD report. Today, business as usual is still practiced quite dominantly, but there is change happening, and we see that quite a lot of things are moving now. I think this conference is showing that so many things are now moving. How have the narratives evolved over the last years? What's exactly happening? But what are the barriers? What are the lock-ins that still need to be overcome? And what are the action that is now urgently needed? For this question, I have with me a wonderful panel of experts, and they actually all are authors of a new book which is looking at the transformation of food systems 12 years after the international assessment after the Global Agriculture Report. I have with me here Hans Herren from the Millennium Institute, Yvette Perfecto from the University of Michigan, Lim-Li Ching from the Third World Network, and Molly Anderson from IPAS Food. Welcome to all of you. Great to have you here. We'll first start with a keynote speech from Hans Rudolf Herren, and he will share with us the key messages of their book, of the review of what has happened so far and what now urgently needs to be done. We will then listen to Yvette Perfecto, to Lim-Li Ching, and to Molly Anderson, who will deepen specific aspects of this work. And then we try to really make it an interactive session to leave a lot of space for discussions, for your questions. So please, whenever you have a question, just put it into the box, ask a question, which you can see in the broadcast. We will take it up. We will try to accommodate as many of your questions and make it a really lively, interactive session. But for now, I want to hand over to Hans. Hans Herren, he is the president of the Millennium Institute. He has been awarded many prizes, also the Alternative Nobel Prize, also the World Food Prize. And we are very proud of that. He's also the president and founder of BioVision Foundation. And you will present to us the key messages of this very important book, which we have now brought out, which brings us right on the topic of transformation of our food systems. And I will now share that. Please go ahead, start.
Thank you very much, Frank, for the introduction. And I want to greet everybody who is participating in this session of this very important conference. Sure, it will be very difficult to tell you all about the key messages we have come to put together following the publication of this book, Transformation of Our Food System, the Making of a Paradigm Shift. But what I want to do, I'm going to pick some key words or key elements out of these different key messages, and we will have a chance later on with my colleagues on the panel and also answer questions to go in more details of where we stand today. And today, IAASTD, which was actually quite long in the making. It published in 2009, but started 2002 at the Sustainable Development Summit in Joburg. So it took quite a gestation time even to come up with exactly what we're going to do. And the idea was at that time to look 50 years backwards in agriculture, the food system, and then sort of come with a recommendation on what to do 50 years forward. The looking backward was the easy part. The looking forward was more complicated.
Excuse me, Hans.
And
before we go too much further, Frank, will you please go into presentation mode on the PowerPoint so we can see the slides a little bigger?
Okay, and I want us to go over some of the main points which we put together in this book, which Frank showed you before, The Transformation of the Food System. A few of us, authors of the report, sat together about 2 years ago in Berlin and decided that we should take stock of what happened. And why is because actually the report, although it was signed by 59 countries, got very much traction, very little traction at the government level, very few exceptions. It was really the NGO world who carried, I think, the message of the report forward. And whenever you see anything happening in the transformation, mostly due to the effort of many people, authors, people who found some good information in this original IAASTD report, which was titled very well as Agriculture Ethics Codes. And clearly at that time, we said that business as usual is not an option, that we need to make a major transformation, a radical change in the way we do agriculture and the concomitant food system. But again, it has only gone that far, and why I think is because the top-down was missing. When we look at the book, so the book has a number of stories about or reports on reports which were written in the meantime, since the publication of the IAASTD report until the publication of this book. And it just shows, how many new reports were actually generated or generated through or because of the IAASTD report. When we and also then we had updates on key issues and what we're going to talk about, the key messages. I just want to take one picture on the trends. I think one element there's many very important ones, but I think you all heard, you just published yesterday that last year was the hottest year on record ever since we measure temperature. And I think this should be, again, a message for everybody that agriculture, who is contributing a quite great deal to climate change, needs to really change and very fast. So we'll go to the other elements. I left everything in the PowerPoint here because we'd like to make sure that it is complete. So next slide. So again, so we need this decisive action. It's no longer an option; it's an imperative.
So sorry
and I think that sentence said it all.
Hans, so sorry to interrupt again. Frank, would you please go into? You're going to re-share your screen. Then once you do, please press present on PowerPoint, and then make sure to advance the slides. We weren't seeing that. Okay, here we are.
Okay, here we are. Yeah, good. At least you can see
the present button, either at the top left or at the bottom. It's a highlighted little presentation board. So
presentation mode.
Yeah, while he does that, maybe I can go and continue. So the key messages, I think, which are has been distilled from the book, where author 3 of the book's author also, Marcia Ishi Aitman, Lim Li Ching, and again, the group has also approved these key messages. And again, they are to be seen in the PowerPoint. So when we look at key message 1, business as usual is still not an option. A radical transformation of food system is necessary. And that's clear, a radical transformation. We were already back then sure that we can not only make small moves of what needs to be done, but we need this radical transformation. And I think that also scared a lot of people at that time, in particular government, who saw this taking risks, changing a system, which, maybe not perfect, but was fulfilling at least some of the objectives of the governments to feed or nourish their people. But we, at least at the time of the IAASTD report, saw the writing on the wall that this cannot go on much, much longer. Key message 2 is, again, see, if we don't make progress at the national and global level, and what is it due to, is because of a lack of political will and also power imbalance and lock-ins. And so we had a number of lock-ins. In particular, I think what was important is the vested interest who stood in the way of the changes, which has to come from top down, that is policy shifts and major policy shifts. On the key message 3, we cannot solve today's multiple converging and accelerating crises with unidimensional, linear, reductionist or mechanistic responses. And we know that we have said that the Green Revolution, which is a very reductionist approach to food production, needs to go. It may have produced more food for a while in some areas, but it is not the solution. We needed to take care of a multitude of problems which we had with conventional and also Green Revolution agriculture. And so here again, the way forward was really to make the changes, the radical changes in the way food is grown, but also acknowledging that it goes beyond the production of food. And so agroecology, which in its latest definition really encompasses the whole food system, is the method we wanted, or the practices we wanted to promote. Progress toward a livable and viable future requires deeply participatory democratic processes. And here the main issue is really to implement a human right-based approach to legislation to address the inequities, the power asymmetries, again, in inclusive settings. That was the important message here, is that we have to be much more inclusive in our discussions around the food system, and come up with again, processes which will allow the input from all the parties concerned. Key message 5, stabilizing climate and reversing trends in biodiversity losses require transforming agri-food system toward these agroecological systems. Again, we had the food waste issue. It's been addressed. It's still there. We have the meat consumption issue, which is out of control in many places, and against valuing natural, social, and human capital. I think that is something very, very important. And when you look at the data, as I say here, they don't lie. We have gone well over our planetary boundaries in the areas which are sort of controlled by agriculture, where agriculture is responsible. And that actually is at the production side as well, I think, the consumption, which I call out of control. I think here we have to really give a much deeper look in our own behavior to see how can we make the changes. And those changes can only be possible if we have also the consumption side taking care of it. Message 6, promoting a healthy, diversified, and sustainable diet can both reduce the major forms of malnutrition and offer multiple reinforcing co-benefits to human ecological health. So here, again, changes in the diet will change actually the production. I mean, demand really very much dictate what's going to be happening in the field. If we as consumers decide not to buy anything from industrial agriculture, any of these commodities, over processed food, production will change. Also, the processing will change and the marketing will change. So again, I think a lot of the power for the transformation lies in the hands of the consumers, and they will help the farmers who want to make the change make this change. And key message 7, we're almost done. So rebalancing power in the agri-food system requires action to both curtail the power of dominant corporation and large businesses that underpin this industrial food system. No, we are just saying that these vested interests. So government one way of changing this is if governments start to reassign those subsidies toward agroecological transformation. There's a huge amount of money, billions are spent every year in subsidies who actually continue and reinforce the old system, which needs change. So again, I think governments have really the power to make those changes. It is also the people who have the chance to elect governments who can be participating in these changes. So again, I think, everybody has to be part of this transformation. This is sort of my message here also, in order to have a future food system that is sustainable, nutritious, deals with the sovereignty issues, deals with indigenous people's knowledge. So all this has to come together. And so we have key message 8. So we need a revisioning and a recentering of values of equity, of reciprocity and solidarity. The principle of democracy, who come under heavy pressure these days, as you all know, justice and collectivity, and the recognition that humans exist within and not outside of the nature. And I think this is very key, that we see ourselves as part of a nature and not controlling it from the outside. And so we have to go from this option of options for action, which what we were told to do and not recommendation at that time, to really actions. And I think we can't wait much longer. We can't wait to have many more meetings, be the food summit, which has been planned for later this year. This is just more talks when actually we know exactly what to do. We know exactly where the levers for change are and who needs to be involved. So let's look forward to these changes. Let's make sure that everybody who is concerned, gets in this area to activate the levers of change. Time is running, we don't have much left, and so now it's imperative, it's the time to act. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Hans, and sorry for the trouble with the slides. Somehow the system didn't allow me to go on presentation mode, but I think you did nevertheless a marvelous job without getting distracted by my fiddling with the technology. It's a big topic, and we are already in the middle of the subject matter. We are also running a bit short of time. That's why I want to hand over directly to the next speaker, who is Yvette Perfecto. She is a professor on environmental and sustainable agriculture topics at the University of Michigan. And she has done extensive research on biodiversity in Central America, Mexico, and the Caribbean. And she will now talk about the contribution of agroecology to biodiversity conservation and resilience, and particularly on the role of indigenous people. Yvette, the floor is yours, without PowerPoint, luckily.
Thank you. More than a decade ago, the IAS provided policy options to shift course away from business as usual and towards agroecological practices that place small-scale farmers and their knowledge systems at the center. Of course, these farmers, we know, are the ones that produce the majority of the food that we consume. Unfortunately, like Hans was saying, today the majority of the land is still under the exploitative and extractivist industrial agricultural system that have contributed to the climate and biodiversity crises. Threats to biodiversity have intensified with industrial agriculture. Local varieties and breeds of domesticated plants and animals are disappearing, posing a serious risk for global food security. While biodiversity is also disappearing at a very fast rate. For example, in the last few decades, insect biomass have declined by 75 and 98% in some protected areas in Germany and Puerto Rico, respectively. And these reductions have been attributed primarily to the intensification of agriculture. But there are beacons of hope based on agroecological principles that have emerged primarily from the grassroots. In this conference, we actually have seen many examples of these. They are showing multiple paths toward path forwards toward a true transformation of the food system. These alternatives are based on agroecology. At the center of agroecology is biodiversity. Agroecology fully embraces the complexity of biodiversity, and farmers all over the world, especially small-scale farmers and indigenous farmers, depend on this biodiversity for productivity, sustainability, and resilience of their farming systems. Biodiversity provides important ecosystem services such as water and climate regulation, pest control, and pollination. Between 35 and 75% of all cultivated crops rely on animal pollination. Also, a diversity of predators and parasitoids or parasites have work alongside farmers to help regulate insect pests and diseases. Diversity of domesticated and wild varieties of crops and animals offer resilience to perturbations and stresses. For example, in Puerto Rico, in the aftermath of Hurricane Maria, farmers that planted a diversity of root crops, along with their main commercial crops, were able to provide food for the local population at a time when very little food was available. Turns out that these root crops were very resistant to the impacts of the hurricane. Agriculture remains one of the main contributors to climate change through deforestation and emissions of nitrous oxides and methane associated with agrochemicals and industrial livestock production. And in contrast, diverse agroecological and indigenous methods of farming, also agroforestry and sustainable grazing practices that regenerate the soil and sequester carbon, offers promising pathways toward climate change mitigation and adaptation both. Diverse agroecological systems and landscapes can also reduce probabilities of zoonotic diseases. Recently emerged infectious diseases like Ebola and even the COVID can be tied directly or indirectly to changes in land use associated with industrial agriculture. Intensive plantation agriculture reduces biodiversity in forested areas, allowing wild pathogens that would normally die off in the natural forest to propagate more widely across susceptible populations of people and livestock. Finally, diverse agroecosystems also contribute to healthier diets as a result of food and nutritional diversity. So in some highly diversified, well-managed agroecological systems maintain greater species diversity at local and landscape levels, while meeting also the food and livelihood needs of the community. It is important also to emphasize that agroecology is built not only on scientific knowledge, but also and strongly on local and indigenous knowledges. Bringing agroecological and indigenous approaches together in conversation offers a powerful way forward, rooted in interculturality and respect. These multifunctional systemic approaches stand in sharp contrast to very limited benefits that are offered by narrow technological fixes, such as GMOs and the new genetic and information technologies that do not address underlying agronomic deficiencies, inequitable power dynamics, or the dominant social and environmental constraints to sustainable production. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Yvette. That's amazing how everything is interconnected. I think you showed that very strongly, and also the link to from biodiversity to resilience. Coming to the next speaker, Lim Li Ching. You are member of the Third World Network. You have done extensive research on sustainable agriculture in East and South Asia and in the Pacific. And you're struggling always with the power imbalances in the food system and the corporate control. What are your insights there? How can you emphasize the key messages which Hans has shared earlier? Jing, floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Frank, and good morning, good afternoon, good evening to everyone who's watching. I think Yvette has very well articulated and shown that an agroecological transformation of our food systems could really work. But we know that there remain systemic flaws and vested interests that continue to prop up what is essentially a failing industrial agriculture and food system. And right now, the pandemic has actually laid bare the inequities that prevail in our food systems. We've seen transnational agri and food corporations continuing to make obscene profits in this time of crisis, while their supply chains have become hotspots for COVID-19 infections and transmission, impacting thousands of workers. And yet, these corporations are becoming ever more powerful. Trends in industry consolidation identified by the IAASTD have not only continued, they have actually intensified. The market share held by the top 4 firms globally in 2019 is 40% or higher in an increasing number of sectors. Now, 40% is the figure above which most regulators consider a market uncompetitive. We see this in agrochemicals, where 4 firms control 65.8% of market share, animal pharmaceuticals, 58.3%, commercial seeds, 53.2%, and farm equipment, 46.2%. Notably, well-known, infamous corporations such as Bayer, formerly Monsanto, ChemChina, formerly Syngenta, and Corteva, a merger of DuPont and Dow, very familiar names. They are among the top 4 in both the agrochemical and seed sectors. And as these transnational corporations become increasingly powerful, they exert greater influence over public policy and research, while remaining largely unregulated as they set prices to their advantage. So they basically determine what we grow and eat, how we do it, and how much we pay for it. And these corporations are also complicit in large-scale land grabbing and have obtained control over seeds and genetic resources. A recent report late last year by the International Land Coalition found that land inequality is already 41% higher than initially believed, threatening the livelihoods of billions of smallholder farmers. And these are the farmers who provide up to 80% of food, particularly in developing countries. And to make things worse, this resource grabbing has extended into intellectual, digital, and social domains, enabling industry players to shape agri-food systems to their benefit. One recent example, increased e-commerce, particularly of food items during the COVID-19 crisis, actually increased the net worth of Jeff Bezos, the Amazon founder, by a shocking amount of $24 billion. And last year, FAO actually signed a letter of intent with CropLife International, a trade association representing the interests of corporations which produce and promote hazardous pesticides as well as GM crops. Now, hundreds of civil society organizations protested this move, concerned that the industry would unduly influence the UN organization responsible for food and agriculture issues. It does seem a rather bleak picture. What can be done to address these barriers and to affect real food systems transformation? I'd like to focus on 3 points, which were highlighted in the key messages of our book. Firstly, as Hans has mentioned, we really need deeply participatory democratic processes. And this cannot be attained without attention to basic rights, in particular the rights of farmers, women, indigenous peoples, and other people working in rural areas. Now, this requires enacting legislation and measures to promote and protect these rights, and strong policy commitment to obligations established in human rights laws and norms, such as the UN Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples and the UN Declaration on the Rights of Peasants and other people working in rural areas. Now, the current negotiations for a legally binding UN Treaty on Business and Human Rights could also play an important future role. Secondly, we need action. We need action to curtail the power of dominant corporations and large businesses that underpin the industrial food system. Governments have tools at their disposal, such as competition and antitrust regulations. They can redirect subsidies, as Hans mentioned, away from corporations that farm unsustainably and towards agroecological practices. But this requires political will. We know that governments can act on large corporations if they want to. For example, we've seen recent moves to break up big tech. But political will comes when we, the peoples, assert our will and pressure our governments to act. And finally, we need to replace corporate and elite control over land, seeds, water, and other resources with cooperative ownership and democratic models based on principles of circular and solidarity economies. We can provide space for different trade and marketing systems that empower and allow small-scale and peasant farmers, indigenous peoples, women, and rural and urban communities to flourish. During the pandemic, we have seen many such examples of communities coming together, providing food for each other, short-circuiting long supply chains, and building on community-supported agriculture. All this requires deep changes in governance to foster inclusion, participation, empowerment, and agency of peasants, women, fishers, livestock keepers, farm workers, those who produce and supply our food. I think we can all make a difference, and we will reclaim our agriculture. Thank you.
Thank you, Ching. That was very impressive. I mean, frustrating at the one side to see all these power influences in the food system, but also hopeful to see the many things that are growing bottom up. And you're referring to the governance issue, which hands over perfectly to our next speaker, Molly Anderson. Ching, we get back to you later. Molly is a professor of food studies at the Middlebury College. She is also a member of the International Panel of Experts on Sustainable Food Systems, and she has focused a lot of her work on resilience. Now, in our conversation, I asked her, can you tell us more about the aspect of food governance? What's happening there? Also in light of the Food System Summit, what's needed in the next decade? Molly, please.
Thank you, Frank, and welcome to everyone who's watching. I will definitely be talking about governance in the Food System Summit, but first I want to return to something that Frank mentioned as he was introducing our session, the issue of narrative. Narratives are the stories that we tell ourselves about how the world works. They can constrain our imagination or they can liberate us. This coming year will be truly decisive in deciding which of two competing narratives about the future of food systems will get funding and support. Industrialized agriculture within capitalism is a constraining narrative fostered by the illusion that we humans can control and predict nature with our technology. But both climate change and the COVID-19 pandemic have shown us that our technologies are killing us. Instead, a better alternative is agroecology, with its narrative of restoration, health, and well-being, of listening to nature instead of controlling nature, and being responsive to the laws that nature imposes. With agroecology, food systems can build soil, sequester carbon, preserve agrobiodiversity and wild biodiversity, as Yvette has explained, and keep poisons out of water and air. But to some people, our food system is mainly a source of immense and expanding profits. Everyone must eat, so if you can control land and the resources needed to produce food, you can control people and flows of money. This narrative of profit and control is common to members of the World Economic Forum, comprising the 1,000 wealthiest companies in the world. A society that worships wealth sees these companies as leaders, instead of questioning how and at whose expense that wealth was obtained. But nature and workers, including the small-scale food producers, who supply at least 70% of the food that's eaten in the world, are the source of that wealth. Yet they do not have a voice in the World Economic Forum. For these food producers, the food system is a source of life itself, and the loss of their land and degradation of nature through industrialized agriculture is deadly. The World Economic Forum is partnering with the United Nations to sponsor a food system summit in 2021, as Hans mentioned, and several other sessions in this conference have also brought up. The president of the Alliance for a Green Revolution in Africa was designated as a special envoy to drum up support, even though the Green Revolution epitomizes the industrialized agricultural approach. Many smart people have decided to participate in this summit, hoping that something positive will come of it. I respect their decision to work inside the summit while being very skeptical of the possibilities of positive outcomes. The Food Systems Summit carries significant risks to the global movement for agroecology. It has been organized outside the Committee on World Food Security, which is the main international space, the main international forum for discussing and negotiating issues of relevance to food security. The CFS is unique among UN organizations in that it gives civil society an equal voice in discussions, along with the private sector and national governments. The CFS has agreed that all policies and guidelines must be congruent with the right to food, so it's rights-based, unlike the Food Systems Summit. In 2019, the high-level panel of experts of the CFS produced a report that clearly documented the advantages of agroecology over sustainable intensification, climate-smart agriculture, and other forms of industrialized agriculture. Many people within civil society believe that this report and a subsequent global narratives report from the high-level panel of experts have been threatening to industrialized agriculture and the people who see food systems primarily as a source of profits rather than nourishment and livelihoods. And this Food System Summit is a result of trying to combat that threat. By bypassing the CFS, failing to endorse the right to food, and giving such prominence to the president of the Alliance for a Green Revolution in Africa, the Food System Summit seems poised to promote a narrative that will perpetuate the view that food and land are commodities to be sold to the highest bidder, and that Green Revolution type fixes are the preferred production system. The IAASTD gave us the best scientific evidence that these approaches are simply wrong, and we don't need to keep rediscovering this evidence. We certainly shouldn't be giving agroecology short shrift in agricultural research, in international visibility, and in work to improve food systems around the world. And that's what's happening today. Thanks very much. I look forward to your questions and engaging more with you.
Thanks very much, Molly. It was fantastic. And there are a lot of questions already coming up, and I want to directly go to them. Now we have a bit this technical challenge that we speakers can't see the questions directly, so they need to be brought to us. But I saw that there is one with a very, very high vote, also supported by 10 people, and that goes to Hans. Hans, you mentioned the power of consumers. The role of consumers, can't they also be food citizens who can participate and shape the food system in multiple ways? What do you think about that, Hans?
Yes, thank you. Also, thanks to my colleague on the panel. Very good presentation. I think really covered the subject very well. On the consumer, in the end, we have as consumer control. We can go into a market, a supermarket, and say we buy this or we don't buy that. In particular, in the industrial world, where people spend not even 10% of the total income on food. So if it's a bit more expensive, given all the advantages, I think it can be done. Even maybe 50%, even double, means very little in terms of extra money paid by the majority of the consumers who actually are responsible for the overconsumption, for the creation of this industrial type agriculture, by wanting always cheaper food or thinking that's the God-given right for cheap food, a lot of overly processed, which again leads to the production of a lot of commodities which can be economically processed into many different foods. So it really, I think that the consumer, I mean, they don't have 100% control. But I think they have a fairly strong capacity to influence, how farmers produce food, and I think that has to be emphasized. Now, sure, Europe, the US, each have over 40 million people, to the power a few more because of COVID, who can't afford much more expensive food. But again, we have an economic system which has been helping that wrong farming system, this exploitation of our natural resources. And so at the same time, as consumers need to make different choices, I think our authorities, and again, need to make a different choices in terms of economic system. We need a more equity in this world, everywhere. Some places more than others, and more fairness. So this is all connected. But in the end, I think we as consumers, at least in the industrial world, have a whole lot more power than we think we have.
Absolutely. And we are not only consumers, we are also voters, we are also activists, we can be professionals who engage. But I see Molly raising her hand. Please, Molly, want to add something here?
I just wanted to say I agree with Hans that as food citizens, we do have power that we're not using adequately to support certain food systems, to support certain kinds of producers. But food industries are spending billions and billions of dollars manipulating science and advertising the unhealthiest products. And many people are very susceptible to this, susceptible to disinformation. So the amount of money that's going into promoting the wrong kinds of food systems is far beyond the health messages and the messages directed to food citizens about promoting the right kinds of food systems and farming.
Absolutely. I want also to get to other questions. Is it directly related to this, Yvette? Please, a short statement. We can't hear you yet. You have to unmute yourself.
Sorry, just a very short addition, and that is related to the consumption of food, but it's essentially the fact that industrial food is highly subsidized, number one, and that there are a lot of externalities. So if we incorporate in the price of industrial food, if we incorporate the damage to the environment, health, et cetera, it would be much more expensive than the agroecologically produced food.
Absolutely, and subsidies bring us to the next question. Policies matter, and we have Paul Holmek, who, by the way, yesterday made an excellent presentation on the case of Denmark, on what policies they have introduced. He asks all of us, what are best practices in national policies to upscale agroecology, both on the production but also on the market and consumption side? Now, to whom can I give this question? Who dares?
I'd be glad to start.
I think Jing hasn't started yet, so please let her.
Okay, I'm sure we can all contribute to this. I just wanted to put in something on the table in terms of policies. I think that, of course, governments can play a big role, and I think the question was also directed to countries in the global south. I think that our governments need to really, it's a two-pronged approach to stop subsidizing industrial agriculture and all its failings, and to then support the transition to agroecology, to more sustainable ways of farming. And this could even be direct financial support. Unfortunately, many governments are stymied by rules that are set in international fora, such as trade rules like in the WTO or through free trade agreements. But there has to be a paradigm shift. We need to change these policies. We know what works. And we need even things like, for example, procurement. Brazil has been an excellent example, using public procurement, procuring from agroecological producers, supplying food in schools and hospitals, for example. And this is something that can guarantee markets for smallholder farmers as well at the same time. So there are many things that can be done. And I think we are not short of some of these ideas of what governments can do. The problem is, I think, the political will.
And there are so many examples from around the world. And if you want to know more on that, have a look at the Food Policy Forum for Change. Maybe Martin can put the link in the chat. Their policymakers are exchanging on best practices. I want to move to a next question, and we go very Hans, okay, very short statement.
Yeah, I think, the one thing is we need institutional changes, and government needs to start to change what research institutions are doing, what their extensions are doing. You cannot change the system if you leave the research going in support of industrial agriculture. That's what's happening almost all over the place. If you look at big research institutions in agriculture, you can go from UC Davis, Cornell, and etc. I mean, I just mentioned the ones over here. That has to change. And if there's no change there, I don't see how we can help our farmers make those transformations. And I think it's also something which is in the heads of the people, the mindset of our decision makers. So I think it goes really quite far, but institutional change is needed. And we said that already in the original IAASTD report.
Absolutely, and that brings us to another question, which is linked to research and to knowledge. And here we go very democratically by those questions who had the highest votes. And the question goes to Yvette, and it's about who or how should we collect indigenous knowledge? And I combine that with another question. What are examples where agroecological programs have given equal attention to indigenous versus Western knowledge? Let's see what you make out of these two questions.
Yeah, so I think is in agroecology, what we're seeing is that combination of, on the one hand, scientific knowledge, on the other hand, local and indigenous knowledge, which basically, have contributed enormously to our understanding of how agroecosystems work and what are the best practices in agroecosystems. There are, when I saw that question in the chat, I wasn't sure if it referred to programs that are academic programs or to kind of development programs that incorporate or try to incorporate indigenous knowledge. In terms of programs, academic programs, there are a number of agroecology programs I'm more familiar with the ones in the United States that do incorporate indigenous knowledge. And there are more and more recognition of the importance of indigenous knowledge in agroecology. Now, at the level of movements, like the MST and Via Campesina, for example, indigenous knowledge is also an essential component. Basically a lot of the agroecology that's coming out of those movements is based on the practice of agroecology, and in some cases in Mesoamerica and South America is based on indigenous knowledge.
Indigenous knowledge, local sometimes is also misused by, say, more right-wing people. That's a question one of the participants asks. For a country like UK, how do you conceptualize this local or indigenous knowledge? I ask that back to Yvette before we get with other questions to other speakers.
Can you clarify again? What's the question?
Yeah, the emphasis on indigenous knowledge on the one side and the local knowledge, but local is also sometimes misused by more xenophobic people to keep out everything which is from outside. So how do you deal with this? Any guidance to countries like the UK or European countries?
Well, Shin.
Otherwise, I put it to Jing because she.
Let's give the hand to Shin because I saw her hand going up.
Sorry, I just wanted to add some thoughts on this. I think the principle, when we talk about agroecology and of course indigenous knowledge, but it's also, it's essentially farmers' knowledge, right? Maybe the farmers are indigenous, maybe they're not, but farmers have such a wealth of knowledge. They are the ones growing, producing food, practicing, interacting with the environment, with their context, the local context. So, I was just thinking also that, a really good example of farmer and scientists working together, from there are examples in China, for example. I know of groups working there with farmers, with indigenous farmers from minority groups in Yunnan, really just doing participatory plant breeding, using different practices to increase production and to provide food for their local communities. There's also MASIPAC, the Farmer Scientist Network, which is a very well-known partnership of farmers, farmer-led, but working with scientists. So I think there are many examples from around the world where farmers and the local knowledge there has been so important because it is based and rooted in the context of where it comes from.
Hang on, Ching. From this farmers' knowledge, individuals, how can they access people in power? You focus so much on these power questions. That's what one person wonders. How can you engage in compassionate, meaningful conversations between individuals and people in power, although there is so much ego and so much vested interest? Any thought on that?
I think, this is happening already, and I think the movement, the agroecological movement, has already wielded a change in the narrative that we see internationally and I think it started with the IAASTD, or at least, a big push came then. But that has led to a change, as we've seen in the international arena and in an international context, where the voices of farmers, and particularly through the CFS as well, and I think that's been important, providing the space for farmers, for producers, for fishers, for livestock keepers, for them to have the voice, for them to talk about the things that affect them directly, and to have an influence in these policy discussions. And this is a right that is recognized internationally in the International Treaty on Plant Genetic Resources for Food and Agriculture, the right of farmers to participate in decision making. And I think we need to be able to provide more space for producers, for the knowledge holders, to be able to, and that's what we've called for in the book, a more inclusive, democratic, participatory process.
Absolutely. Time is cruel. We are already close to the end of the session, but there are so many more questions. I suggest we request a Zoom breakout group, a Zoom room where we can continue the Q&A sessions. But before that, I want to give you all the chance for a quick, for the official part, final statement of your thoughts. And this is the moment where you can put in all the points you still wanted to urgently say. Who wants to start? Hands up. Else I volunteer Molly.
Well, let me just say that one of the international places where producers small-scale producers do have a voice is the Committee on World Food Security. And that's why it's so important that they are able to say directly to government representatives and to people from the private sector, no, what you're saying is happening in our country, that's not what we're observing at all. And they can also demand the kinds of changes that they want to see in policy. And let me also say, in relation to academic programs and informal programs on agroecology, Colin Anderson and I, not related, but we did a chapter in the book, the Transformation of Our Food System book, about resources that are available on agroecology that includes material about programs, teaching programs, and also research, participatory action research that is out there that are stellar examples of agroecology in action. Thanks.
Thank you, Molly. Who is next? Yvette.
I'll just add that even though the pictures look, when you look at the amount of land that is still in intensive industrial agriculture, it can be pretty depressing. But on the other hand, as I mentioned before, and in the book we talk a lot about this, there are so many initiatives related to agroecology, and so many people in the world, especially small-scale farmers in the world, that are practicing agroecology, that give us a lot of hope. I think that people are coming up with all sorts of alternatives that are actually making a difference in their own lives, you know, and enhancing their livelihoods. And we, as consumers, as researchers, as people interested in this, can play a role in many, many different ways to move that forward and to truly transform our food system. And so I just don't want people to get discouraged by the fact that corporations have so much power and still gaining more power, but at the same time, at the grassroots level, we are gaining a lot of power as well.
Thank you, Yvette. Yeah. Jing, you would be next if you unmute yourself.
Sorry, I'm just asking my daughter to stop her singing. She's very excited. I just wanted to add, let me just...
okay, Hans, maybe you go on first.
Okay. All right. Yeah, thanks. Yeah, what I want to maybe say to conclude this is that we need to stop reinventing the wheel. You know, as many of us said, that we know what to do. We have said so and written it many times. And we also know that there's a lot of work going on from the grassroots, from bottom up. But, you know, we can multiply the area, let's say, on the organic by double it. I mean, we're still nowhere. Even if we quadruple it, we are nowhere. So if you look at the total versus, you know, what is done in terms of agroecology, sustainable agriculture, and all the rest, it is very little. And it will not go beyond what it is today unless we have a policy environment which changes. We have to finally, you know, again, do the institutional changes we need. We need to support the farmers in the transformation, not to do the same old stuff, but the ones who are actually going to do something different. And that comes from top down. And I mentioned in my PowerPoint also the lateral, you know, so we have the bottom up, we have the top down, and from the sides. And I think on the sides you have the consumers, but we have also the actors of the private sector. And again, they need guidance. And this guidance, we have the example from bottom up. We need the effort from top down with policies. If we don't have all these, I don't think we're going to go where we need to go.
They will shut us off in any minute. I hope you already got the chat link to the Zoom meeting. Final words, Jing.
Yeah, I just wanted to say that I think, you know, with the pandemic and the things that have happened since then, I think it's people are hungry for change and people want to do things differently. We want to build back not just better, but more transformatively. And I think agroecology really provides some of this way forward. It's a matter of us having the will to do it. And I think we can scale up, scale out in terms of policy support, scale out in terms of the number of people who are practicing agroecology, and that's increasing every day, and also scale deep in terms of changing mindsets and really affecting real transformative change. Yeah, thank you.
Thanks a lot to the panel. You did a wonderful job transforming our food systems in 60 minutes. I think a bit more is needed. See you all in the Zoom room. Please now move to the Zoom room, and we try to also get moved there. See you there in a minute. Thanks a lot for this amazing session. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Frank.
Thank you.
Thank you, panelists. Great. Thank you so much.